Welcome to The Current by TreasureCoast.com, where we discuss interesting people, places, and happenings on Florida's Treasure Coast.
Okay, all set.
Cool. Well, Adam, thanks for joining. I appreciate you being on. I know the Treasure Coast Wildlife Center has been I growing a lot seemingly recently. I've seen your guys' stuff a lot. I've seen you guys getting tagged in a lot of stuff. So why don't we start by you just giving an introduction to who you are and what the center actually does?
Yeah, so my name's Majtyka. I'm the new executive director, so I'm coming up on a year now, so it's very exciting for me. I think it's August 13th is my anniversary date, so that's very exciting. So what Treasure Coast Wildlife does is we are a rehabilitation and release program. So we take in wildlife from Florida. It's either brought to us by a rescuer from the public or from a animal control or any type of person who wants to bring them in, and we get them back into the wild if we can. So we rehabilitate them. They go through a process. We have a side mission that's kind of part of it too, is educating the public and the community about the importance of wildlife and conservation throughout Florida. So we really do a combination of both things, and we're really trying to get out in the community more to be that resource for wildlife, what to do with animals that are sick, injured, or orphaned.
I'm glad that you brought that up. What kind of animals do you most often treat? I
Mhm.
mean, I imagine that most people, when they think of it, they think of, maybe like a dog gets lost or a cat gets lost. Obviously, for you guys, you're dealing with wildlife most of the time that has to be nurtured or healed, and then it's back off to doing its thing. Is that correct?
Yeah. So we see about 3,200 animals a year. That number's been growing by about 9% for us. It's 10% average
Wow.
across the country for rehabilitation. But we mostly see a lot of birds and small mammals. So the biggest number of animals that come in is typically eastern cottontails or rabbits. We see about maybe almost a quarter to 20% of them are rabbits and squirrels. So the big numbers of those small mammals. We do see a lot of birds of prey. We don't see as many seabirds. We're kind of a little bit further away from that, and we're kind of pinched in between two amazing organizations that do a lot of seabirds. But a majority of it is small mammals and birds.
What's the usual reason that these animals are coming in? Is it like they get sick? Is it because, like, maybe they come in contact with humans? I mean, is it? I imagine it's not always like a one-stop shop, or like they don't all have the same injury. But is there kind of a recurring cause that you see?
Yeah, we see probably 3 to 5 different recurring type of things. So you have kind of what we call like animal interactions. So domestic or feral dogs and cats, which is probably one of our biggest ones. Vehicle collisions, which is exactly it. Gopher tortoises maybe being hit by a car, or another animal being hit by a car. Um, a big one right now is baby season. So they're, animals that maybe fell out of the nest or they were fledging and hurt themselves. But those are really the kind of the big three. We do see other times what we call a kind of kidnapping. It's a situation where someone thinks they're doing the right thing and brings us an animal, but they're not actually needing our help. But we then, once they're in the system, we have to continue to kind of work through them through their rehabilitation process. And those are kind of the big ones. We do see some fishing injuries. We have pelicans on site. All of our pelicans have fishing related injuries that have deemed them non-releasable. So a lot of the shorebirds, it typically comes in with like fishing related, line being left or a hook or something of that nature. So those are kind of the big ones. Unfortunately, they're all pretty much human interactions, which is something that we,
Right.
work through and try to do our best. Our philosophy has kind of been, we're not going to stop that human interaction with animals. So how do we best educate and give information of how to help with those types of things?
Yeah, I guess I don't think anybody would be surprised to hear that the human aspect is going to be a big part in that. Obviously, it's not great to hear, especially when it comes, I think a lot of us have heard stories about domestic animals and cats and dogs and the effect that they can have on other species around us. I think a question that I'd written down was, I'm sure you get it all the time, but what should someone do if they see an injured rabbit, a tortoise? I mean, how do they know that they're not, as you put it, kidnapping? Or are there things that they should look out for where they say, hey, we should really reach out to another organization?
Yeah, that's a great question. So, what we love to do is if an animal is obviously needs help right away, it's a gopher tortoise that's been hit by a car and it's bleeding and the shell is crushed, get it to the facility or any facility. Call your local animal control. Here in Martin County, we have an amazing animal control. So, if you call them, they will come out right away and bring us the animal. Other animal controls are kind of the same, but not always. So, you want to kind of check and see what's going on with that. But if it's not something that's an immediate injury that you go, oh, we really need to bring it in, call a facility like ours. We take phone calls all day. There's website or on our website and other websites have amazing little like graphs that tell you like, is it this? Okay, no, then go to this section. So it's kind of like a navigational graph that kind of does it. But call us and ask too. We talk about all the time about trying to re-nest a bird. So if we get a person who calls and they're like, hey, I found a baby and it's just sitting in my backyard, we'll ask them, well, do you see the parents? Do you see a nest? Well, yeah, I see the parents. All right. Well, can you put it back in the nest? No, we can't. All right. We'll make a nest. And that's what we call re-nesting. So we had somebody use an Easter basket one time and they put this animal back in the Easter basket, kept it out of the sun, and the parents raised it. That's what we really want to happen is those parents raising these animals in these cases. So if we can save somebody bringing them into the facility, then we'll always look to do that.
That's really interesting to hear, and I guess that makes sense that there's going to be like a tiered system. Not everybody's also always going to know. It might not always be like a total black and white thing. Um, and you had mentioned that you guys do some sort of educational stuff. You guys do some stuff that's offsite as well as at the center itself, right? Or do you want to talk a little bit about what you offer in that regard and how different people or organizations can get involved with it?
Yeah, so we offer multiple types of education. So sorry, we typically talk about like outreach. So if you're looking at like a school or a home group that wants to like HOAs will sometimes look at it. So we tailor those programs to different stuff. So if like you're an HOA and you're looking to kind of know like what can we do through our community to help with wildlife, we offer those types of programs. If it's a school group and you want to kind of teach the kids about what's going on and the importance of rehab, the importance of wildlife, and the importance of kind of humans interacting, we offer those types of programs too. And then on site, we are open to the public Thursday through Sunday from 11 to 3:30. You can come out and do what we kind of call like a self-guided tour. So you can just kind of walk around. If you have a question, there's always staff members around. You can kind of talk to them. Or you can do like a guided tour. So it's a paid tour that we offer where you would set it up beforehand. We can do that multiple times a week. And our director of education will kind of guide you through whatever you're looking for. So if you had a couple kids and you wanted to kind of have like more of like a learning environment, she would tailor it to that compared to if you were just kind of wanting to come out and see what's going on and what we do, she'll tailor it to that too. So we have a lot of different types of programs that we're offering for people to come out or us to come to them. And we kind of tailor it to each individual unique program that we're looking to do.
Yeah, that's really cool. And I guess that spurs another question, which is, what does like a typical rehabilitation program look like there? I mean, I imagine you've got a lot of different people who have a lot of different expertises in a lot of different species, and even the ages, if it's a juvenile versus if it's an adult, I'm sure matters a lot. I mean, what does that type of program usually look like? I mean, is it usually like all hands on deck, or is there one person who maybe specializes in the rabbits, one person they're great if you've got, a turtle? How does that work?
So the process is pretty much the same, even though it's very unique to the animal. So we have a licensed vet that is always what we call our vet on record. That's required through FWC, through our permit. Then we also have a licensed rehabber, which is also required through our permitting. So they work hand in hand. And then we have our animal specialists who work with our rehab team. So each individually animal is kind of unique in what they come from and what they have going on, but they're not specialized like each person is specialized in the animals. They come in typically and we do what we call like an intake process. So if you come to our facilities, most of the time you don't even have to get out of your vehicle. There's a stop sign, someone will greet you. They come, they take the animal, they give you some paperwork to sign, and then they will get the information from you. Once that is done, then the animal goes through like an assessment period. So depending on whatever that animal is, its age, its actual needs at that time, we start kind of working through it. So if it's an animal that comes in with like a broken wing, we're going to typically get it inside, get it calm for a little bit, and then schedule like x-rays and other stuff with the team that needs to do it. And then after that, whatever is going on with that animal, it gets like a rehabilitation plan. So it could be that an animal just comes in and needs some time and some fluids and some, just quiet time to relax and get back to normal. Or it could be something like where if it's a broken wing, we need to kind of try and fix that wing, reset it, and then bandage it up. During that process, they're constantly being evaluated to see what's going on. So every animal is looked at multiple times a day, unless specified by the vet or the rehabber. And then what they really are kind of looking for is to see where they're at in their process. I kind of equate it to like you going to the hospital, right? You're going to go in. We all have different reasons for being there. A stay might last 2 hours to get all of your blood work and everything else done, and then you're going home, or you might be admitted to the facility. So a majority of the time we admit them into our facility, if you're kind of using the same analogy, and then throughout that process they go to different places. So we, at the very beginning, we kind of keep them confined in a smaller enclosure so we can keep them safe, keep them quiet, keep a good eye on them. And then when they're getting closer to being released, we put them in bigger enclosures to start building back up. So if it's a bird and it needs to build up those wings so it can fly again, we want to take it out to a bigger enclosure so it can start doing those repetitions and get ready. We're also kind of monitoring how they're eating and all of that stuff. So there's a lot of factors in it while they're kind of working through their process. And then they would get to hopefully the stage of release. That's our ultimate goal with every animal that comes in here, is to be released back into the wild. When it comes to release, there's like a ton of different factors. We're looking for, is the animal eating? How is it flying if it's a bird? How is it moving if it's, a small mammal? And then, once all of those factors are kind of looked at, the entire team, including the rehabber and the vet, make that decision. And then we would hopefully release the animal back into the wild.
I'm glad you touched on that, because that was going to be kind of like a follow-up that I was thinking about, is how when an animal is ready to be released. Especially, if, like you had mentioned, that analogy I think is good, where you go to the hospital, you get your blood work, and you kind of know. I mean, of course, you can speak with the doctor, so there's that level of communication, which you guys obviously don't have the pleasure of. I'm interested from
and
your
that's
point of
dual
view.
sided too. Yeah.
Yeah. Right. Yeah. I'm sure that there's always pros and cons to everything you're doing, depending on the species or who's involved with it. What do you think is trying to think of how to phrase this? I mean, specifically in Martin County, where you all are, you're right there, pretty close to St. Lucie County, is, I think you said you're from. What do you think are some of the biggest threats facing local wildlife? I mean, obviously you had mentioned that humans are involved in a lot. Are there other factors that you're seeing?
Yes. Unfortunately, they're all kind of driven by humans, right? So our big things that we talk about are invasive species, feral cats and dogs, human encroachment on territories, coexisting in places like Port St. Lucie and some of these cities across the country and even in Florida. So we do see other factors, but unfortunately, they're still kind of being caused by humans. If we take invasive species, we created this problem and they're really struggling. One of the questions we get a lot is like, what is the most important species you're working with? And I always answer like, we don't have an answer for that, because you can't gauge something like a rosette spoonbill, which is a listed endangered species, compared to like a rabbit. And the reason for that is, like, in the Everglades alone, depending on the research you look at, between 75 to 90, I think 98%, they're saying, of small mammals and birds have been devastated by invasive species. So it's like, how do you gauge what's more important? We're trying to keep as many animals back into the wild as we can and educate people of these importances. But, rosette spoonbill, which is an endangered listed species, is very important, but it's also all those rabbits that don't exist because they're so important for everything. We don't think about bugs and small birds and
Right.
Squirrels as being important, but they are. Everything kind of lives in a cohesive unit when it comes to all of that stuff. So it's really hard. There are, we talk about feral dogs and cats a lot. I'm an animal lover. I've been in the zoo and aquarium field for like 15 years. I've always had pets. My family were farmers and stuff like that. So we have like this deep connection to animals, but feral dogs and cats are just wreaking havoc across the United States and Florida, especially. They're killing so many birds and so many of our like local native wildlife that it's like we need to work through that situation. So there's a lot of different stuff, but it's really always connected to kind of like humans. And our kind of education message that we always talk about is we're not going to stop all of that stuff. So how do we do the best that we can with it? When we talk about human encroachment, the studies for Florida right now are 100,000 acres a year are lost to just development. So that means in 10 years,
Wow.
1 million acres of Florida wildlife or wild areas are going to be completely gone to development. So how do we navigate that? Like, we're not going to stop that, but can we help developers maybe instead of 100,000 acres, they do 75,000 and then 25,000 is left as parks, because we're finding that people love to live in these areas that have that message kind of put in there. And maybe, if you're an apartment complex is not just every unit like from the beginning to the end, but there's a park inside of it that's like an acre or two. People love that. They love to go and kind of sit there and hang out, walk their dog, just do whatever. So I think our message is really trying to kind of help bridge, like, we're not going to always stop it. So how do we do the best that we can with what we have currently?
Yeah, I could see how that development or habitat loss, or I guess maybe like fragmentation, could lead to that. And I that kind of spurs another thought, or a question I should say, is are there things that you usually recommend, or that you would recommend to, let's say, a homeowner, um, a way that they could make their property safer, healthier, friendlier to the wildlife around them? Obviously, you might have alluded to a little bit. We've talked a little bit about domestic pets, but I'm sure there's other things that you could think of.
Yeah, yeah. So we recommend a lot of stuff. Having safe spaces for like food and water for those native species that are kind of in your backyard. Using native plants. I think that's a really cool, I don't want to call it a trend, but it's kind of a trend as everybody's looking at native plants. They're so important for the environment here in Florida. And then kind of doing a cross between all of that stuff. When it's coming to like, if you're doing work around your yard, maybe kind of asking experts like that are in your community of what is good and what is not. When you look at palm trees, for example, it's really good to do, I think they call it a hurricane cut, where it's like all of the dead fronds are gone. And everybody looks at that as like, oh, that's the standard. But if you have the ability to, leaving some dead fronds gives spaces for the animals. So they have, can build nesting material. They can actually build nest, or it holds bugs and other stuff in there. So there's a lot of different things you can look at, when we talk about bird feeders. Keeping them cleaned regularly is something that I don't think a lot of people think about. But if you're getting so many of these birds into your backyard and they maybe have something that could spread, if you're cleaning it regularly, the chances of spreading it are better. Same thing with your bird feeders. I think they actually recommend cleaning bird feeders like once a month nowadays.
Mm.
It's hard. Don't get me wrong. Like I had a bird feeder for a long time, and cleaning it monthly is difficult. But I think there's a lot of stuff like that. Rodents, rodenticide, and kind of pest control. That's one to look at too. We see a lot of hawks and birds of prey that come in with poison, and the poison you're using for a rat is fine for one or two. But what happens is these animals are finding a ton of rats that have been killed by the poison and the bait you put out, and then it slowly builds up into their body till they reach a certain point, and then they actually do get poisoned by it, and they have to come into our facility. We do have an amazing program that we work through of getting them through that, but it's not always going to happen. So we recommend, if there's other stuff, or talking to your local pest control company, or the company spraying herbicide on your yard, seeing if there's other options. That we use here currently a control method that does birth control. So instead of the rats dying by poison, they just cannot continue to produce rats. We understand here that, they're going to continue to live for a while, but we are constantly keeping up with that. Snap traps are another one that, people don't really love all the time, but it's not getting that secondary poisoning out there. So there's not always a perfect solution, but there is ways to have good conversations and kind of like work towards that. I know that just today I received a thing from our pest control company that there's a new poison out that they're using that they've been testing for years to get rid of even the secondary poisoning. So having those conversations with your pest control team, stuff like that, looking at what's going on in your yard, using native plants, stuff like that really helps create an environment for local wildlife. Because again, we're going to be living them. I live in an amazing place in Port St. Lucie, and every day there's a hawk flying by. There's squirrels in the backyard, and I have neighbors on every section of my house, out the back, out the front, at the left and right. I could almost touch my left hand neighbor. So, but there's still tons of animals everywhere, and so
Yeah.
we do the best that we can in our place, and other people do to create an environment where they're still going to live and have the things they need.
That's a really good point. I'm glad you also touched on some of the things that maybe people unexpectedly do that are harmful. I'm sure there's a lot of people that, I mean, for example, like the poison for rodents, I'm sure people have done it. They don't even think about it. And I think that's a really good point, maybe to the resilience of some of these species, because I've thought about that a lot where, of course, we're all over the Treasure Coast. I'll go over, let's say, the Roosevelt Bridge, and you always will see like an osprey, hanging out up there. And it's amongst really what is, there's a lot of development. There's not a whole lot of really open green space for it. But of course, I guess they do find a way to kind of make a home where they can.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, and that's a big thing that we talk about, and I think that's kind of the future of like what everybody's looking at is like how do we create these not oases, but how do we create this cohesion between the two of them? Um,
Mm.
you just talked about the osprey there. They have a ton of areas to fly, but there's also we got a call the other day about pelicans living like in this person's backyard. They're everywhere
Hmm.
along this area, especially on the Treasure Coast. We have so many inlets and so many um, oceans and rivers and everything where they live. So we need to find a way to kind of continue to work together. And again, some of those things I just spoke about really work towards that. But it's also getting educated and continuing to get educated. If you're thinking about like maybe you live on Hutchinson Island, I'm sure you're hearing all the time about downward facing lights, that helps with the sea turtles.
Yeah.
There's a lot of different stuff because, again, we're not going to get rid of these animals. I heard a stat the other week that was amazing is that in the entire United States, there's not a city that doesn't have coyotes. And you're like, what? That's crazy. But they're everywhere and they're just adapting to where they can live. And every animal's just trying to continue to survive. So they're adapting to live. You're seeing behaviors be even kind of like evolving as they're living in places. I'm originally from Michigan, and Detroit has a breeding pair of peregrine falcons that live in the city of Detroit. And they've just done stuff
Wow.
to try and help them out, but they're just they're constantly eating rats and rabbits and all sorts of stuff. But when you think of peregrine falcon, an animal that dives at almost 100 miles an hour plus, you don't think of them being in the city of Detroit, in like almost downtown Detroit. So, they're evolving, and we just need to kind of help with that and be part of it, I think is what we kind of look at here.
That's really cool with the coyotes because I remember last year I had heard a story about coyotes that had made their way onto Hutchinson Island, and people were taking pictures of it and posting it in one of our Facebook groups. And it was really interesting because it was Jensen Beach. There's coyotes on Hutchinson Island. I mean, it's wild. And I'm interested. Do you think of any other species that might have some misconceptions about them? I mean, I'm sure coyotes or raccoons, or there's a lot of them that maybe people look at and maybe there's misinformation, or maybe they don't really know what to think about some of these species.
Yeah, I love this question. My favorite example, and I've had this example for years. I used to work only specifically with birds, but is vultures. Vultures to me are one of the most misunderstood animals in the world. They found that where disease and bacteria was spreading in environments that the vultures weren't there because their natural defenses or they're the
Wow.
natural defense against bacteria and disease spreading. So their bald heads don't allow all the blood and guts and everything to get onto to the rest of their body. Their digestive is able to handle it, and then their feet, as gross as this sounds, they constantly poop on their feet, which then again stops the spread of disease. So if there's a carcass out there they're eating it. So they're going to stop that thing from eventually, if it died from bacteria or died from a disease, or it's starting to build those, they're going to eat it. And then they don't spread it everywhere else like other animals do. So that's one of my always favorite ones to kind of talk about. I think there's a lot of other animals out there that are always kind of misunderstood, but that's my big one to look at. They're so important. Snakes are another one. You know, there's people who love snakes, and then I think the rest of the world, right? Like you either love them or you're just like, I don't want that thing near me at all. But they're
Right.
so amazing for taking care of, insects and rats and mice, and they're really good to have as part of kind of the environment around your house. My wife is always like, oh, I don't want that snake in the yard, but it's so important for all of those things it's helping to take care of. So those are two big ones that we kind of use around here to kind of talk about and give kind of fun facts, as they call them.
Yeah, the vulture one is really cool because I guess that's got to be super top of mind for a lot of people. It's like they kind of look as they kind of come across as, what's the dude that's carrying like he's got the cloak on and he's got what do you call it? Something passes
the
away.
Reaper of Death.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah,
they're kind of like the
yeah,
Reapers,
yeah.
and then but obviously, as you mentioned, they're super super important. I just there's one question I wanted to ask before we finish up that you had mentioned it's baby season now. Are there specific times of year that people need to be especially thoughtful of certain things going on? I mean, maybe it's turtle season, or maybe there's something else happening that you say, hey, look, this is the time for, you've really got to be on high alert in certain settings.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of different times. So, for us, we always talk about baby season really starts about February and then ends somewhere in August. We're still seeing extra babies coming. So, if you're looking to trim your palm trees, maybe asking the tree trimmer to at least just check the palm trees to make sure there's no nest in it. On the other side of this, starting somewhere around September and a little bit before, you have migration patterns. So Florida's uniquely positioned of where a lot of birds are traveling up and down, and insects too. So, last year in November, we had I think it's an Arctic tern. So it's an animal that lives in the Arctic, but it came through in November on its migration pattern. So there's a lot of different times for stuff. We're in the middle of sea turtle season right now where everything's laying the eggs. I think that's May through September. Don't quote me on that one, but there's a lot of different stuff. So I think, again, it's always about kind of trying to educate yourself on what's going on and what those things are. So, we do see a lot of different ones at different times. Baby season's our biggest one. And so there's a lot of different things you can look at. I mentioned the tree stuff. You can also, keep an eye out if you're letting your dogs out or, that kind of stuff during those times to make sure nothing's in the yard.
That's awesome, Adam. I appreciate you being on. I appreciate I feel like we covered like such a huge amount of information. And I appreciate it. And I want to make sure that you have a moment to kind of tell people if they want to support or volunteer or find out more to follow up with what you guys are doing, how they can do so.
Yeah, so we have multiple ways. We kind of talk about our Facebook page is one of our big things. So if you wanted to look us up on Facebook, Treasure Coast Wildlife Center. Our website's tcwild.org. If you're ever looking to do support through donations or fundraising, you can go, or volunteering, you can go to our website. We're always looking for volunteers. We have an amazing group of volunteers, but we're looking to build that. We're actually focusing right now in the future of building that program out with more education and some more animal care stuff. So if you're ever interested in volunteering, please just look us up on tcwild.org. There's forms on there you can fill out and it gets right to the organization. So, and then we always talk about as nonprofits, donations and support is one of the ways if you're looking to help. We have right on the website, there's a place to donate and help us out. So.
Awesome, Adam. Well, I hope that people will listen to this, hear it, and go and support you. And I appreciate you being on and talk with me. I'm gonna have to go clean my bird feeder now.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much. We really appreciate you and everything that you're doing. So thank you again for this. It's been wonderful.
You got it, Adam. I'm sure I'll talk to you here pretty soon.
That's a wrap for this episode of The Current by treasurecoast.com. If you enjoyed the conversation, be sure to subscribe so you never miss an episode. You can find us on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and YouTube. Follow us on social media or visit treasurecoast.com for local events, tips, and news. Have a guest or topic you'd love to hear on the show? Let us know at treasurecoast.com. Until next time, keep riding the current and enjoying everything the Treasure Coast has to offer. See you soon.